Well, firstly, thank you for coming. I mean, earlier on we thought we maybe just talking to ourselves. Thanks for braving the weather. And welcome to the panel discussion on regionalism in an era of climate change, which is actually being hosted by the Pacific Elders Voice. If you forget what we are, that's the banner. And I would like to acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet and pay our respect to the elders past, present, and emerging. We also bring greetings from the elders across the Pacific. Let me begin by briefly describing what this group, calling itself the Pacific Elders Voice, is all about. PEV for short. A number of you have been asking, perhaps I said, well, look, wait for this evening when I'll reveal the all. Well, PEV for short, but please don't confuse this with the Pacific Engagement Visa, which is also somehow being marketed as PEV. But just to remind ourselves, we actually adopted this acronym before the Australian government. So I hope we don't have to take the advice from the lower school, Rebecca, and then to make sure that it's ours. I just want to explain briefly what is PEV, what was the need for the Pacific Elders Voice, the membership, what it's all about, briefly, its mission, objectives, and a little bit about the governance and how it's supported and how you may get involved. It's not an exclusive club by any means, although it might appear so. Well, a couple of years ago, and I mean, this conference has really been about storytelling and sort of very light-hearted discussions about how things progress. So I thought we'll begin with a little bit of stories. A few years ago, we all had this sinking feeling that the Pacific views were not as prominent and articulated on the many challenges and issues in the region compared to, say, the period in the lead up to the Paris Agreement. On closer scrutiny, we realized that many of the leaders at the time were no longer in power. And true to the character of politics in many of the Pacific countries, most of these former leaders were completely sidelined. Yet, many of them are or were still full of energy, raring to go, and one only has to look at President Tom to underscore that. With the wealth of experience and knowledge, respected regionally and internationally. The genesis of this group is really very interesting as well. And at a casual conversation with Ian at Pickle Cafe here at ANU, I'm sure most of you know where Pickle Cafe is. Now, we discussed this idea and immediately reached out to some of our former leaders. These were people we had all worked with closely at regional meetings, at the Pacific Island Development Forum, PIF, UNFCCC, especially in the lead-up to Paris negotiations. And much to our surprise, the response was overwhelming, with initial support from people like Prime Minister Anila Sopoanga from Tuvalu, President Hilda Hani from Marshall Islands, and President Armote Tong from Kiribati, who then used their personal relationships to reach out to other people like President Tommy Renegazao from Palau, Dane Matt Taylor, who had tried and was in Papua New Guinea, and Professor Robert Underwood. He is a former congressman and former president of the University of Guam. Later, we also reached out to Ambassador Tavala, who is here today, and Professor Konai Feynman, who, as many of you know, is an educator and was at the University of the South Pacific. I just want to stress here that the leadership in the context of Pacific Elders Voice is not just political leadership. Here we define leadership in the most inclusive sense and includes meritorious individuals who have demonstrated competency, effectiveness, and greatness in the pursuit of the region's peace, stability, and prosperity from all spheres, and includes cultural, academic, economic, environment, political, religious, and so on. So it's not based on any ethnic or geographical balance, but entirely on the merit of individuals. And in the collective opinion of the PEB, those who have left a legacy, hopefully positive ones, are the ones who are merited to be as part of the Pacific Elders' Voice, which is really an independent alliance of Pacific leaders who have had leadership positions in the region. So the purpose of the PEV is really to draw on the collective experience and wisdom to provide constructive thought leadership, perspectives and guidance that strengthens our region's resilience to current and future challenges and opportunities. And our mission is to offer collective Pacific wisdom in a service of a just, inclusive and prospective society. So, as part of the objectives, the Pacific Elders' Voice support Pacific states, countries and societies, provide independent Pacific perspectives on critical issues, attempt to amplify the Pacific voice through high-quality leadership, research and ideas, recommend actionable policy options, and participate in high-level diplomacy in the service of the region. So it's really trying to foster a regional connections and collective thinking. The few values which we hold very dear. It is a body which is Pacific-led, and you'll find that all the members are from the Pacific. They have had leadership positions in the Pacific. One of our other core values is empowering our youth, and I think that is quite important in the context of the conference here this week. We really want to ensure a sustainable future for future generations of the Pacific people. And prioritizing support for young people is really one of their key roles. And the third core value is in terms of seeking social, economic, and environmental justice. PEV believes, of course, in equal rights and opportunities, and they will stand in solidarity with all those suffering from any forms of discrimination, and will stand against, will call out any racism, inequity, without fear or favor. So I think the Pacific Elders' Voice, with all those values and very laudable objectives, attempt to provide non-partisan views on a number of issues. And as you will see from our various statements and outputs, they transcend a whole range of issues. In fact, the three main vehicles for providing this support or this voice is through statements and policy briefs, media releases, conferences like this one, which they're participating in now, attendance and speaking at regional and global forums, and through podcasts and social media and so on. Just to give you an example, the Pacific Elders' Voice has issued, we've only been in existence for maybe 18 months or so. We had conceived before the glass was popped. And the PEV has issued over 12 statements. And these have ranged on issues ranging from climate security, the IPCC reports, deep sea mining, nuclear discharge, Indo-Pacific strategy, oceans, as well as the support for decolonization of Papua and Karachi peoples. They've also provided support to initiatives like the ICJ and the IMO, which is the marine organization dealing with shipping emissions. The most recent statement, which was released yesterday, and I hope you have, most of you have seen it, was on the recent AUKUS deal. If you haven't, please look at our website and do have a look at these. And the other statements are all there. So it's a non-profit body. It's registered in Majuro, Marshall Islands. It has a governing board, articles of association, and it is supposed to be supported by grants, philanthropies, donations, and so on. Currently, there's only one person, secretariat, come technical support, yours truly. And I just want to put it up here because right now we really need good support to ensure its sustainability. Because obviously one can never rely on just one person. It zealously guards its integrity and independence, and hence it has not accepted donations from governments. So PEV is still poor, but had good technical support from friends like the Edmund Rice Center and Global Strategic Communication Council, and we're pleased to have Corinne and Awaki from the Human Rights Center, who have really been good support to us, and a few other organizations in Australia. But more so is the PED members themselves who have been sacrificing their time, efforts, resources, and so on to keep it going. And I think they have established, obviously, a niche for themselves in the region. So much for the Pacific Elders' Voice. I would now get on to the real objective of this session here, and that is the panel. My name is Mahendra Kumar, and I do provide, as I said, technical support to PED, and I've been instructed by the leaders here to moderate this session. Obviously, I couldn't say no. It was a unanimous decision at a meeting, one of our virtual meetings. Ian Fryer, who's sitting in the middle here, and I were providing support in its initial stages when the group was founded. But as you can see, he has now graduated to the other side, leaving me languishing in this solo act. By training, I'm a physicist, and have been working in the areas of climate change, environment, and energy as an academic researcher and the policy interface in the region, providing diplomacy and negotiation support. But it's been a real privilege to work for this great group of people. I mean, I've learned so much from them, and that's, if any encouragement, if any of you are very keen, I mean, it's amazing experience working with these great people. So we are fortunate there to have a very powerful panel to discuss some of the current geopolitics and issues which is impacting the region and its many challenges. I apologize for the lack of gender balance. The two ladies, former President Heine and former Secretary General Matt Taylor, are not able to be here for personal reasons. They were supposed to be on the panel, and I'm sure most of you understand. But nonetheless, we do have these three gentlemen who have long-standing experience of the Pacific and in their various capacities. I think I'll defer my own commentaries on the subject itself and let the panelists give them the flexibility to raise whatever issues they feel appropriate under this very broad topic. They will speak for around 7 minutes, maybe 10 at maximum, and I hope we can leave a lot of time for Q&A at the end, where you can provide your comments and ask questions. Let me begin with President Anote Tom. He has been on some of these for quite a bit, and you must have heard a lot about him, but I think it's only proper that I introduce him more formally. He was the President of the Republic of Kiribati from 2003 to 16. On leaving office, he joined Conservation International as a distinguished fellow and continues to speak on a worldwide basis at conferences and institutions. One of his greatest deeds, I think, was he was responsible for declaring what was then the largest marine protected area. He goes of more than 400,000 square kilometers of Phoenix Islands protected area, PIPA, in 2008. Now, PIPA is being listed by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site. So President Tom, not surprisingly, has been nominated twice for Nobel Peace Prize, was awarded the Sun Hat Peace Prize in 2015, and Peter Benchley Award, the Edmund Hillary Award, and a number of other awards in acknowledgement of his great work. Ladies and gentlemen, I have much pleasure in requesting President Tom to speak briefly on the issue of regionalism and the current challenges, mainly focus on some of the recent setbacks in relation to the Micronesian countries joining and rejoining, climate security, leadership, time permitting, oceans, environment, and hopefully nuclear issues. It's quite a lot of issues in the time available. So please welcome President Tom.
Thank you, Mahendra. Let me begin, as we always usually do, with a blessing. So I will bless you, and I will ask you to bless me back, please, all right? And so what I would say is that, meaning may you be blessed. And so you would just respond by saying, no, okay? So, let me bless you. Come on over. Okay, if you hadn't said that, I bet that my blessing would have come back to me, all right? But you heard, I think, but before I begin, I want to take the opportunity once again to express our deep gratitude for the opportunity to speak and share ideas. You know, it's, I guess I have been here on occasions to speak, and I never get tired of trying to share the ideas, the experience, and maybe the what goes through my mind as I try to ponder over the things that I advocate on over the different parts of the world. This afternoon, well, yesterday, I think I was being told yesterday by Mahin, you know, you can join the panel, but don't say everything because you have to speak tomorrow. So I don't quite remember what I said yesterday, and I'm in danger of repeating this. But of course, climate change undoubtedly has been the dominant issue in our part of the world, and for a very, very good reason. And I think it's one of those things, as I said yesterday, that for quite some time, we didn't really step up to deal with it, because I think it was lost in the confusion of other pressing international issues. As I said yesterday, international terrorism was at the forefront, the very top of the United Nations General Assembly agenda. But climate change had been in the background. I recall, my recollection goes back, I remember one of our early ministers, I remember very distinctly the former Prime Minister of Tuvalu at the 1992 meeting, when he raised it, and he spoke on behalf of the Pacific to raise not the first time, this issue. Rather, unfortunately, the Prime Minister did not stay on in office. He lost, so with it, the momentum. And so when I came in 2003, and I started again in 2004, and as I said, it was lonely, because you don't know whether you've got people covering your back, or you're up there and left alone. But I can say with absolute pride that on climate change, the whole region has stepped forward. We have led the debate. We have changed the world agenda. And I think it really demonstrates that if it's relevant enough for you, if it is important enough, then you really have to step forward, no matter how insignificant you think you are. When I said that, we're always conscious of how small we are, and the discussions that I've been listening to about our size, smallness, you know, the theme of yesterday's lecture, I think it's very, very, very apt in this case. But I think the climate issue really demonstrated that if it's an issue over which you have moral high ground to come from, then you can make an impact. And of course, as a region, we did that. I think in 2014, if my dates are correct, I remember that we also got together in Samoa, and this was part of the Samoa pathway, when we as a region pushed the ocean as an agenda, a separate agenda on the UN agenda. Before it was stuck somewhere. So we pulled it out and said, no, it cannot be. It is too important to be buried somewhere else. And so I think with pride we can say that as a region we have made an impact. And I think this is the value of regionalism, being together. But I think sometimes, quite often, when we have a common goal, then we work together. But once we begin to have divergent interests, then we fight amongst ourselves. And I think we've seen examples of this. Early this morning, I was interviewed on the 6 o'clock. My hand raised at 6 o'clock interview for me. No thanks to you, my hand, but it's on the Oka statement that we issued as the PED. Okay? I understand that it is a powerful statement, and it will be subject to criticism. And of course, it was raised. And I think I was just going through it again, and I was wondering, why did we put that? Because I was asked yesterday and today. And one of the questions I asked is, why should PEP have more legitimacy to make these comments when some of the leaders have really come along with it, they've accepted it, like Fiji, and of course the chair of the forum, Prime Minister Cook Islands. Initially, he objected, but after visiting Washington, after coming back from Washington, he's changed his position. And I think my point is this, that as a region, I think we seek of things happening around us and being discussed around us. When it's all about us, we're never involved. And I go back as far as the Second World War. You know, there was a war raging on in Kiribati and Tarawa. We had it in Panama. There was that huge, and everywhere in Solomon Islands, in Micronesia. But we never had a say in any of this. When all of the nuclear bombs were being exploded in Christmas Island, I was there, just a few miles from where the bombs were being exploded in Christmas Island. And in the Marshall Islands, in French Polynesia, we had no say. When we are now dealing with climate change, everything is being discussed somewhere else. We have no say. When AUKUS was being put together, we had no say. So I think our criticism is all of this could have been, all of these noises, the comments that we issued, could have been avoided had there been wider consultation, had there been greater awareness, that there had been, if there are any problems, we would sort it out. And I think that was my comment. You know, it could well be that the AUKUS would be good for us, but we don't know. All we know that it seems to be in conflict with our vision of a peaceful Pacific Ocean, a blue Pacific, not one that would be invaded with a lot of military activity. And so regionalism, in that sense, is a powerful institution in which we can use in order to achieve our political goals. Of course, once in a while it suffers, and I think we had the example of the fragmentation that happened quite recently with micronations opting out. And I remember I was actually locked out of Kiribati for 11 months, and I was stuck there when all this was going on. And I met Meg in Solomon. I said, Meg, if they are smart, they would not try to make that decision virtually. They need to sit down face to face because it's too sensitive an issue. And of course, they went ahead. So see what happened after that. It was a split. Fortunately, we're back together again. Now, my husband raised an issue. I was involved with the review of SPC towards the end of last year. And one of the issues we brought out for the attention of the SPC was deep sea dead mining, because it seems to have been left alone when SOPAC was absorbed into the SPC. But this is the time when SOPAC should have been more active, when the SPC should be focusing on the deep sea dead mining. Because deep sea dead mining is the one issue, and I did point this out when I presented the report. It's an issue that has the potential once again to split the region. I can talk about deep sea dead mining later, because even within the PEB, we're not entirely in agreement. Yeah? And so I think in terms of how we can achieve more as a regional grouping on climate change, I think we have to enlarge our grouping. I think in the past, the forum actually, and I must say that it was pretty, my recollection was that the forum itself was pretty quiet on climate change, and I never really understood why until more recently. And the reason was because the Australians and the New Zealanders didn't want us to push it, because it was against their agenda, particularly the governments in the administration, the parties in the administration at the time. And I'll share something with you. There was some discussion of that. I remember in 2012, we as a grouping in New York, we told all of our people, let's get together and because Australia was looking for support for a non-permanent seat on the UN Security Council. Okay? So we lobbied, we helped them get a seat. But it was on the premise that they would incorporate climate change onto the agenda of the UN Security Council to recognize at the United Nations that climate change is a security issue for the most vulnerable countries. And of course, in the process, there was a change of government here in Australia, and it was never went on the agenda, okay? And I invite you, I won't tell you, but I invite you to read the terminal report of the Australian government at the end of this term on the UN Security Council, 2014. You can Google it now and you can see, and you'll be surprised. There was no mention of the Pacific. There was no mention of climate change, but a whole many paragraphs about what Australia tried to do in locating the lost Malaysian aircraft. Okay? So these are the things that define our relationship with our neighbors. These are the things that define our relationship with our biggest neighbor, Australia. And I think I know that there is a push to try and find how Australia, the United States, not so much New Zealand, but perhaps New Zealand as well, can establish better relations with the Pacific. Well, I think part of the commentary on the statement on the AUKUS really reflected the views that we have. Because climate change is something that we've always felt strongly about. And we also had always been aware that Australia was very reluctant to continue to provide funding to the Green Climate Fund. They actually withdrew funding. They didn't withdraw, but they stopped contributing. And I think, but then of course, with under the AUKUS arrangement, in a flash, it was possible to pull out something like $368 billion. So we asked. So the money was always there, but not for us. Okay, so that's regionalism, and if we are a member of the same family, and we look after each other, okay? This is the meaning of being part of a family. And I think this has to be the challenge. We continue to challenge Australia on its emissions. I know that the new government has done a great deal of work, but not enough. Because they are cutting emissions to zero by 2050, and when the last time we came, they said, yeah, we're cutting zero. Okay, fine, Mr. But what about the exported emissions? Which is much, much more substantial. And the reply was, oh, it's not our fault. It's the problem of the countries we export. Okay? So we need to step up. I think if we want to strengthen our regionalism, we want to strengthen our connections as a family, then we need to be looking after each other. Unless we can do that. Unless we can do that, there will always be that remnants of tension in our relationship in the region. I think it's about commitment. Let me stop there because let me tell you why I'm a bit radical. I was radicalized in New Zealand when I was a student. I don't know how many New Zealanders are here. When I was at university, there was protests about apartheid with the Springbok, the All Blacks wanting to play the Springboks, okay? So we had to protest against that. During the Vietnam War, we had to protest over the Vietnam War. And so I came back, highly radicalized, and I came back into a colonial environment. So the colonial atmosphere got rid of me as soon as I got back. Thank you.
Well, thank you, President Dong, for your views, and it's good to have a radical on the PICs as well. I think this will keep the balance. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is Ambassador Kalupate Tavola. Ambassador Tavola worked for 11 years as a civil servant in the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forests and in Fiji, and later on with the Fiji Sugar Marketing Company based in London and Brussels. He's a former diplomat. He was based at the Fiji mission in Brussels as a head. He worked there for 10 years and represented Fiji to the European Union, ACP, and also Fiji's representative to various other bodies like FAO, GATT, WTO, UNESCO, IFED, MFO, and so on. He also served as an MP and senator and as Minister for Foreign Affairs and External Trade from 2000 to 2006. He was a member of the ACP and MSG Eminent Persons Group and the MSG, which is the Melanesian Spearhead Group, high-level representative. He is now retired, but he does regular blogs, so very, very exciting reading. You can all Google is kairavuni.com. Ravuni is his village in Kalabu, Fiji, and has a very, very interesting monthly columns for the Island Business magazine. So, Ambassador Walla, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mahan. Thank you all for popping in this afternoon. Very nice to see you all. As you heard from Mahan, there was supposed to be a lot more of us here, and we were going to share the duties. But our number has been reduced, so the number of our duties, the subjects we have to cover, has increased as a result. So I've been given a number of issues to talk about, and I will refer to these in my presentation. But first of all, I just want to look at the subject of what we're doing, Pacific regionalism in the era of climate change. And I just want to place that into its proper perspective. When we talk about Pacific regionalism, we're obviously making reference to the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent, which the leaders had agreed not long ago. So Pacific regionalism basically is a reference to the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent. When we talk about climate change, we're obviously making reference to the Boyd Declaration, a declaration which was made by the leaders some time ago. And in that declaration, our main security threat is climate change. And it's more than just a threat, it's the existential threat for the Pacific. So we've got the 2050 strategy on one hand, we've got the Boyd Declaration on the other hand, and I would suspect that going forward now, under the Pacific regionalism, it will be the two documents that we are going to be looking at, and they will be connecting from one to the other. So having done that, I just want to focus now on the scope of the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent. A lot of regional experts are here, I can see a few of them, and they have tended to classify regionalism into three areas. One is security, the other one is economic regionalism, and the political regionalism. But in any coverage of regionalism, all those aspects would be covered in some degree too. But there would be a dominant theme that would be coming through as far as the regionalism is concerned. So as far as the 2050 strategy, it's obviously not a security regionalism, because security has been put away under the Boyd Declaration and treated separately. So it's not a security regionalism under the 2050 strategy. It's not an economic or trade bloc, because when you look at 2050 strategy, it hardly mentions any free trade agreement or anything like that. So it's not a trade bloc. It's basically a political regionalism. And I wrote about that in my Island Business, which Mahan referred to, which will be published last month. And I talked about the political orientation of the 2050 strategy, and I quote, the political orientation of the 2050 strategy can be gleaned from various sections of the strategy, including leaders' vision for 2050, our values, leaders' commitment in 2050, and from the 7 thematic areas. The letter includes respective levels of ambition up to 2050, two politically laden themes, namely political leadership and regionalism, and people-centered development are foregrounded under thematic areas. The respective levels of ambition speak of the need for greater cooperation to safeguard, secure, and progress the Blue Pacific continent, the unity and cohesiveness of political leadership, responsiveness of the regional architecture, recognition and respect for a collective approach, drawing on the cultural and spiritual attachment to land and the ocean, gender equality, and equal access to public services so that no one is left behind. On that basis, I'm projecting, and I think many would do so, that the 2050 strategy is essentially a political regionalism. So having done that, let me go to the next question. What is the status of the regional order? Because I've been asked also to talk about that. The 2050 strategy is not complete. Leaders agree to it, and it's not complete. The implementation and the monitoring plan is yet to be formulated, and also the regional architecture, that too has yet to be formulated. The thinking of the leaders as far as the regional architecture seems to be changing somewhat. Earlier on, the leaders were talking about a regional architecture where the forum would be at the apex of the architecture. And you would see that reflected in previous the communique coming from the leaders. But the last communique that came from the leaders in their last retreat in Nandi, the mention of the forum being the apex of that architecture has been removed. And maybe there is some changes going on in the minds of the leaders as to what that architecture should be. And you can imagine that if you have the PIF, the forum, as the apex of the architecture, and the architecture would include all the prop agencies, and all these prop agencies are independent bodies with the membership of metropolitan powers. So it would be very difficult for PIF to be the head of an architecture comprising all those prop agencies. So that is probably why the leaders have realized the difficulty that the planners would face. And so they have changed somewhat their tune when it comes to the regional architecture. So still talking about the status of the regional order, as you know, the 2050 strategy was released, and the leaders were advised that the region is guided by the North Star. Now, I criticize that. I think it is we are being misguided by the North Star. And as we know, the North Star is only visible in the Northern Hemisphere. It's not visible in the Southern Hemisphere. If they were thinking of a star that could be visible in the Northern Hemisphere, why didn't they get Herculea, I think it's called? The Hawaiians used that for their navigation. But to be guided by the North Star that is not visible in the Southern Hemisphere, I think it is it's being misguided. And so I also wrote about that in another Iron Business article that was published in September last year, and the title of which was Pacific Regionalism and Astrology, Alignment Defies Logic. And that was published. And in there I posed the question, why don't we use a star in the Southern Hemisphere, for instance? The Southern Cross is an example, quite visible here in Australia and down in other parts of the region. Why not use the Matariki, the Seven Sisters, that is respected by the Maori? Or why not the planet Venus? Planet, the Venus is not a star, but the Fijians, for instance, it's a star. And when you see Venus in the morning, before sunrise, the Fijians call it Neibolasina. And in the evening, when the sun sets and the Venus is at its brightest in the west, it's called Neibolamboni. So I just mentioned them as possible stars to be guided when it comes to the region. Now, I've also been asked to talk about the state of the economic integration, deeper economic integration. And I know Greg Fry is here and he wrote about it. And the region is very poor in terms of trade and economic integration. Way back in 1971, the leaders wanted to formulate an economic union. It took them 9 years, 10 years to come up with an idea of Sparta, which was a preference or a non-reciprocal trade agreement, not a free trade agreement. I thought that was a mistake. They could have started with a free trade agreement. That was in 1981. But it took them from 1971 to the year 2000 to come up with a free trade agreement, which was called PARTA, Pacific Regional Trade Agreement. And when it came to signing, the Pacific Island countries rebelled. They didn't like it. They saw that there were not enough benefits in that PARTA. So the PARTA was scratched. And out of that came the PESA, an economic framework agreement between Australia, New Zealand, and Pacific Island countries, and the PICTA, Pacific Island Countries Trade Agreement, which is a free trade agreement just for the Pacific Island countries. Well, that happened in 2000. And what's happened to PICTA? 2 decades and over 2 decades, only 50% of the membership of PICTA are implementing the agreement. Only 50%. So the PESA, the Economic Framework Agreement, has now produced the PESA Plus, a free trade agreement, and that is being implemented, but not by Fiji and PNG. The two biggest traders in the Pacific Island countries are not part of PESA Plus. So that is the situation as far as trade and economic integration. The Sparta didn't result in a lot of changes and integration, for instance. There was a lot of happiness about Sparta at some point in the history of the forum, and Fiji was even considering presenting a Sparta II in the late 1980s, but nothing came of that. The state of, I've also been asked to talk about the state of seasonal worker schemes. That is covered under the PESA Plus, recognized under the PESA Plus. There are implementation problems, as we read in the press every day. The Pacific Island countries are complaining about loss of skills as a result of people coming to work in Australia and in New Zealand. That would obviously mean more training, they know that, which would mean more resources to divert to training as a result. Nan has also asked me to talk about the geopolitical challenges and examples like the West Papua issue, the Kanaki, and other colonialist, colonial references that we still have today. The way I want to approach this is basically to go back to the orientation of the 2050 strategy. It's a political regionalism, and we can identify a lot of the political forces that we have that we can mobilize to attend to all these geopolitical problems. When you look at the political forces that we can unleash and we can mobilize, this would include political leadership and the exercise of our agency. We've got President Nanote here, who can exercise a lot of political leadership and expression of agency. The Pacific diplomacy is another form of political force that we can unleash to attend to all the geopolitical challenges. Youth diplomacy on the rise is so important. So that is another possible political force that can be unleashed. And the churches, the council, the Pacific Churches, Conference of Churches, is another possible political force that can be unleashed to attend to all the geopolitical challenges. The NGOs and the women, these are all powers, political powers that we have to unleash during this time of our regionalism under the 2050 strategy, because that's what it is. The 2050 strategy is essentially a political regionalism. Man has also asked me to talk about AUKUS. We have heard about AUKUS. We've got all, if New Zealand becomes a member of AUKUS, that will take 5 metropolitan powers supporting AUKUS. And President Nanote has talked about that, and we have released a statement on AUKUS. But to me, the situation is, if another metropolitan powers comes in, that will take the number to 6, from 5 to 6. And that is a good reminder to all of us of what happened in 1947 here in Canberra. Under the Canberra Agreement, 6 metropolitan powers formed the SPC. And the SPC at the time was against all discussions about political aspirations with the Pacific Island countries. So to me, it's just an interesting point that AUKUS has got 5 metropolitan powers now. There will be 6. Are we having a repetition of history? So that's just a point for us to consider. When we're talking about unleashing all our political forces to attend to the challenges, there will obviously be constraints. When it comes to West Papua, for instance, one of the biggest constraints will be the bilateral sensitivities. It's happening. Australia won't say anything about West Papua because of the bilateral sensitivities with Indonesia. PNG and Fiji, the same thing. Because of that bilateral sensitivity, we refrain from talking about West Papua. When Benny Wanda was in Fiji lately and shook hands with Prime Minister Rabuka, people in Jakarta were jumping up and down. This is not a done thing. So this is the kind of constraint that we will face when it comes to geopolitical situation. When it comes to West Papua again, the MSG has a dilemma because membership of the MSG already includes Indonesia as an associate member. So you can imagine when it comes up for membership of West Papua, will Indonesia just sit there quietly and accept? So these are the problems. These are the constraints. When it comes to the Kanaki situation in Numea, I think one of the biggest constraints there would be the French government readiness to take through the decolonization process to its end. whether they are ready enough to do that. When it comes to the other constraints and geopolitical situations, we know that there's geopolitical activities there in the Pacific between China and the US, bipolarity situation. All I can say there, the region is divided. What is going to happen? Should the geopolitical situations escalate and conflicts take place, for instance, the Pacific Island countries and Pacific regionalism in the middle will pay for all the collateral damage that will take place. On that sad note, I'm sorry I want to finish here, but that is the reality of Pacific regionalism. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Bono. There was a lot to unpack there, and I'm sure you've whetted the appetite of a lot of the participants here. Hopefully we can pick up some of the issues later on. Our final speaker is Dr. Ian Fry, who was appointed as Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of human rights in the context of climate change by the Human Rights Council in May last year. He is a dual citizen of Australia and Tuvalu, and is an international environmental law and policy expert. He worked for the Tuvalu government for over 21 years and was appointed as the ambassador for climate change and environment between 2015 and 2019. In fact, I must say here that Ian, those of us who have been in negotiations, really he has been one of the most consistent voices for the Pacific in the climate negotiations, tackling some huge issues. And whilst people from the other countries have changed and so on, he really has been there and obviously has immense knowledge of the process, as well as a lot of empathy, of course, for the needs of the Pacific Island countries. He's also a part-time lecturer here at the Fenner School of Environment and Society at the ANU, and focuses on international environmental policy. Today he'll focus on areas such as human rights and climate justice, migration and climate change-induced displacement, loss and damage, climate finance, IPCC findings, etc., etc. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mahen, and it's a pleasure to be here. As you can see, I've been dragged off the reserve bench to be put here. You were to hear somebody more eminent than myself as in Hilda and Meg to be here, but they couldn't make it, so they had to find me to fill in for them. And I'm very humbled being in the presence of these senior Pacific representatives, and I'm very grateful to be here. So to cover some of the issues that Mahen, I'm not sure I can do justice to everything, but certainly around the climate justice issue, in my role as Special Rapporteur, I have to try and make that connection between human rights and climate change. And if there's one region in the world where this is very prominent, it's this region, the Pacific region. And we know that the Pacific is suffering human rights violations as a consequence of climate change. The right to water, the right to food, sanitation, shelter, education, and for some, the right to life. And these are the challenges that our region faces in confronting this sort of global problem. And the challenges we have to do is to find ways of how to address those challenges and take those to the world. And we've, heard recently about advisory opinions, and I was on a discussion with two other special rapporteurs this morning to discuss our approach to these advisory opinions. And there's three out there at the moment. There's one that was created by Antigua and Barbuda and Tuvalu, a commission, a Pacific Island Commission, Small Island States Commission to seek an advisory opinion in the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea on climate change issues. So we will be responding to that one. We had the Chile-Colombia advisory opinion being sought through the Inter-American Commission Court of Human Rights, and again around climate change issues, and we will be responding to that. And of course, you know, we have Pacific countries within the umbrella of Chile as part of that, so we should be paying attention to that. And of course, Vanuatu has successfully brought forward the ICJ case, and now this will be taken to the International Court of Justice. So there's a lot of opportunities there for getting the Pacific's voice out there into these tribunals to draw attention to the issues that are before us. There's some other interesting litigation cases sort of outside our region, but they provide some good examples of how we could think about taking litigation. And I really think we should be looking at, testing, our rights. And so there's an interesting one that's just been recently brought by Senior Women versus Switzerland in the European Court of Human Rights about their rights and future around climate change. And as we've heard, the Torres Strait Islanders brought a case before the Human Rights Committee, saying that Australia had not done enough to protect their rights as far as their future, their right to food, the right to shelter, and all these rights. And the Human Rights Committee found in their favour and said, yes, Australia has not done enough, and you need to do something about that. We've yet to hear a proper response from Australia from that case. So that's quite sort of, these sort of cases are certainly building in our region. But if we are to build cases around climate change, we have to have an educated judiciary as well. And this is certainly one area where I think, there's opportunities for us to educate our judiciary. And certainly one of the first jobs that I participated in as Special Rapporteur was a virtual workshop organised by UNEP and IUCN to run a workshop for judges in the Pacific to acclimatise them to the issue of climate change. And if you dig deeply, you can find some very interesting cases that have come out in the Pacific. Federated States of Micronesia took out one, I think it was against Bulgaria, about an administrative decision of a coal mine. And the administrative decision came out and said, yes, this coal mine could have an impact on a country in the Pacific. That decision is enormous because of the causal link between a coal mine in distant Europe and in the Pacific. And that was quite a long time ago, that case. And it's sort of been forgotten. But there are certainly, critical cases that can be drawn upon in this regard. There's one issue that I'm particularly interested in, and I know there's been, efforts to bring forward a fossil-free treaty. To be perfectly honest, I'm not a great fan of that idea. I suspect the countries who would sign on to that treaty are the ones who don't have a strong interest in fossil fuels. And a lot of effort could go into that. One issue I'm particularly looking at, as a leverage point is the Energy Charter Treaty. This is an international treaty that guarantees rights of energy supply. And what we're seeing here is a number of what's called investor-state dispute mechanisms being applied by the fossil fuel industry against countries who take action on climate change. And there have been huge payouts to the fossil fuel industry. In 2016, Italy withdrew from the Energy Charter Treaty, yet 6 years later, it was brought before the court and interstate state dispute mechanisms and was ordered to pay 190 million euros to the fossil fuel industry. So these fossil fuel industries are being subsidised by this treaty to the order of, the infrastructure has been protected by the order of 344 billion euros. So this is one that really needs to be thought about. And certainly recently, France, Poland, I think Denmark have withdrawn from the Energy Charter Treaty. And this is one, that I think we should be advocating about, and really drawing attention to this. Because this is, this is energy going in completely the wrong direction. And the money that's being paid out is going completely in the wrong direction. We are, in this sort of climate change world, faced with all sorts of new threats to our human rights. And certainly, I've heard testimonies from people around the world about the growth in lithium mines to meet the energy sectors. And I spoke to indigenous peoples in Argentina about their rights being affected. And of course, we know, as we, in our region, this deep seabed mining is going to be a very controversial issue and has the potential to affect the rights of many Pacific Island countries as a consequence of that. One issue that I'm particularly interested in and pursuing as part of my special rapporteur is to get some sort of legal protection for around the notion of intergenerational justice. We know that intergenerational equity as a concept that's been around for 50 years. In the Stockholm Conference, you'll see intergenerational equity there. But it's never been enshrined as intergenerational justice. And I think we owe it to our future generations to enshrine that in international law. So that's certainly one of the issues that I'm pursuing as part of my work as Special Rapporteur. And I'll be reporting to the UN General Assembly this year with that as a major focus. To sort of get onto the migration issue, this is obviously a very sensitive issue in our region. And I have to tread very carefully around this issue. I recently attended a workshop organised by the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat in Nandi on statehood and the legal status of people displaced by sea level rise. And there are a lot of international law experts suggesting what are the possible legal implications if a country disappears under the sea. To me, this is a hypothetical discussion. I don't think we should even contemplate that any country will disappear. We have the physical capabilities to ensure that all Pacific Island countries stay. We only have to look at what China has done in the South China Sea to a small coral reef and built that up, to be a major airport and military base. You only have to look at Maldives and the reclamation work that they're doing there. So we shouldn't be even thinking about the loss of a country. Nevertheless, some people may have to be displaced as a consequence of climate change. We know that people are already being displaced internally within countries, and a number of countries are developing strategies around internal displacement. What I'm particularly interested in is around the issue of people displaced across international borders as a consequence of climate change. These people are we often define these as climate change refugees. But as we saw in a case that was held in New Zealand against the Kiribati couple who sought climate change refugee status and was rejected by the court system in New Zealand, because the Refugee Convention doesn't recognise climate change as a cause of being a refugee. You have to have suffered from some form of persecution. Some regional agreements in Latin America, for example, have expanded that definition and are looking at incorporating disturbance of public order. And there are arguments whether that could trigger the definition of a climate change refugee as a result of an event like that. So I'm certainly looking at this issue, and I'm reporting to the Human Rights Council in June this year about this issue. How can we give legal protection to people displaced across international borders as a consequence of climate change? Because they fall through the cracks at the moment. And I wouldn't mind betting that there's some of the people that were held on Manus Island and in Nauru were climate change refugees and were refused refugee status and asylum because they didn't meet the criteria of being persecuted. Yet, they've been, had to face migration. And I did a discussion, online link up with groups, civil society groups in Latin America. And there's, a massive migration of people through Latin America displaced by climate change. There's what's called the dry corridor, Guatemala, El Salvador and Honduras. People are being displaced because of a long-term drought and then suffered enormous hurricanes. And so these people have suffered from that. But what we're also seeing is people from Bangladesh who have been displaced taking trips to Colombia and then walking through Central America to North America as climate change refugees. And we need to do something about that. And this is a serious issue. I visited Bangladesh last year as part of my job. The estimates are 300,000 to 400,000 people are displaced every year as a consequence of climate change and migrate into the cities where they suffer other human rights implications. So there are serious issues around that. So, that's the migration debate. There's discussions about, can we have a visa-free system here in this region? Mm-hmm. And I think that's certainly something to be explored. And is this one of the options? I mean, there's, regional organisations talk about migration as an adaptation strategy. I'm not comfortable with that concept. And so, people don't leave their homes because they just want to, they're displaced and only if they need to. And so I'm not sure that's a real adaptation strategy to deal with that. Just quickly on the sort of loss and damage issue, the Pacific was very active in lobbying hard to get loss and damage within the Paris Agreement. And I have to take my hat off to the former Prime Minister Tuvalu, who spent the full 2 weeks in Paris during those negotiations, late night negotiations. So I attended one of the negotiations he had with Senator Kerry, the Secretary of State for the United States, who were implacably opposed to loss and damage under the Paris Agreement. And they had a sort of three-pronged attack against that. They said it didn't have a place. When they realised there was such a strong push for it, they said, okay, we'll incorporate that in the text on adaptation to sort of confuse the issue. And when that didn't work, they said, all right, we'll have it as long as there's a clause which limits liability and compensation. And that was the deal that was struck, that there would be some clause within the decision that accompanies the Paris Agreement that talk about liability and compensation. And I was there in that negotiation, and I can explain why we think that's not such a bad thing. Because if you look at the wording of it, it talks about Article 8 does not give rise to liability and compensation, which by inference means that all the other articles of the Paris Agreement do give rise to liability and compensation. So there are certainly opportunities there, and there is a discussion around reparations and the huge costs that our region suffers as a consequence of climate change through the Cyclone Pam in Tuvalu, I think was 30% of the gross domestic product of the country wiped out in one event. And we know about all the other cyclones in the region, Winston and all the others that have had an enormous effect on the economies of our countries, yet we are not responsible for those effects, and we have to seek reparations. So there is, discussions around a finance mechanism, and there's a transitional committee that's been established under the Climate Convention. Again, I'm not sure that it'll deliver a lot. You know, it seems to be the same old climate change negotiators. In a report I gave to the UN General Assembly last year, I suggested the Secretary General form a group of finance experts who can think outside the box, you know, and come up with the sort of innovative ideas. And there's lots of ideas around: drawdowns of the IMF, taxes on fossil fuels, relief debt. All these sort of initiatives are out there and possible if we've got some sort of good thinkers around these issues. So that, I think, you know, that there's some of the ideas are out there, and I certainly hope we can, you know, get the necessary finance to address the loss and damage that we're suffering. So I think I'll end there, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ian. I mean, obviously there's a lot of issues to discuss there. I did have in mind, I'm aware of the time, that I had some questions, but I think rather than me putting those questions, maybe I should just open it up to yourselves, and perhaps you can introduce yourself, brief comments, any questions to the panel, or any observations. Yeah, maybe we start. Do you have a microphone or something?
No, I don't. But,
Oh, you're all right. Thank you.
My name is Yuki Kihara. I'm an interdisciplinary artist. My question is for Mr. Tabula. So, you know, when the Pacific Island Forum happens, you know, we don't see the contribution of Kabaka Maoli from Hawaii. We don't see the contribution from Tokelau. We don't see the contribution from territories, you know, French territories in the Pacific. But how can these countries that are not independent can be supportive of the Blue Pacific?
Yes, if I can understand the question, you're talking about non-regional members
Yes.
getting some benefit
Non-independent.
Yes.
from the region.
Yes.
Well, why not? I mean, that's part of regionalism work, to produce enough benefits and products so that it can be shared out not only amongst members, but also those who are neighbors, those who are within the region that have yet to form part of the regionalism. That's part of a future discussion. I mean, when you strengthen your region, you grow the region, you grow the benefits, and it can all be shared out. Yeah, why not?
Something that's not being
I have a question about so what would happen to Italy if they didn't pay the fine to the, like, what kind of leveraging organizing needs to happen? What industries need to be shut down in order for these things to happen, to leverage the countries that are responsible to pay the things they need to pay? I mean, it's not just, we can't win this in litigation. We know this. We don't have the money to win it in litigation. What is the people power that is necessary to shut down, to leverage Australia and the United States to really push what's going on at the COP? Because it's not enough. Obviously, diplomacy has not done it. Obviously, many politicians have been taken care of. I don't need creative financial people. We know what we need. What we need is those countries that are responsible to be held accountable and to take their military budgets and give it to us to produce food and protections for our people. But what does it take to do that?
You have an answer to that?
I know you have one.
Well, you know, I mean, that's a huge question to answer. I mean, we can chip away at some of these things. And I think, you know, encouraging countries to pull out of the Energy Charter Treaty, they're bound by these contractual agreements. even if they've pulled out of it. So, you know, I think that's a start, you know.
But if they don't pay it, like you're saying. They
Yeah,
still
but
owe-
they're, you know, they're contractually bound to these corporations. And it's very hard to get out of that contractual obligation. So they've got to just withdraw. But as far as, you know, how we get, you know, nation states to take more responsible action, I mean, this is a real challenge. We only need to look here at the recent legislation introduced by Australia, under sort of a strange name to deal with that, and it allows every company to offset its emissions, not actually reduce its emissions, but buy credits somewhere else. And that's putting pressure on the Pacific under this sort of blue carbon initiatives, which are fraudulent, in my thinking. And so these are the challenges that we have to, and just, wherever possible, call out these, this behaviour. But, we're seeing useful things being brought in by the Biden administration on some elements, under this sort of environmental social governance strategies. But, if you look at the political system in the United States, the amount of money that's spent to elect a president, that money has to come from somewhere, and that's from the corporate sector, So there's a whole issue of democracy being run by the corporate sector in a country like that, and that's the challenge. How do you get rid of that sort of system?
To shut down industry to prevent, you know what I'm saying, right? Like, you're seeing what's happening in France. They're like, you're going to raise the retirement age 2 years? The whole country shut down. They stopped the trains. They stopped everything, right? I'm saying, what does it take globally for us to do this kind of leveraging and stop playing nice?
That's right.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
I'm not it's a serious power shift. But I know, okay, I'm sorry. We're going to talk about this tomorrow. But
Quite frankly, I wish we had the answer. But I see where you're coming from, because, and I think I've come to the conclusion that our political leaders are not leading for the people. And I think, as Ian says, that the democratic system is under attack here. It's no longer the government for the people. It's government for those who provide funding. And I think we have to find a way. And I must admit that this is something that keeps bothering me. If I had a nuclear bomb, maybe I'll put it in each one of them. But yesterday I was joking, Kids talk to their children in schools. Go and tell these kids, talk to their children that they are jeopardizing their future. Go and pick their front doors, and I think we must do this. Because these are the moral people who believe that they benefit by destroying our future. And the question that I must share some conspiracy theory with you. Because I wonder quite often, these people are very smart, highly intelligent. So why can they not understand the science? Why are they not scared as we are about the future of the planet? The only possible answer, and because I get a lot of these discussions with the potential of geoengineering as a solution, okay? Maybe they do have the solution, and they want to get rid of us before they clean it up again, so they can have the world themselves. Quite frankly, I often speculate, and it may not be way off track. I know that there are Elon Musk, he's looking on another planet, okay? Because they can afford to go there, but we can't. So, I don't know what the answer is, apart from taking a much more aggressive stance, because all of the moral people, like all of you sitting here, are here on board. All of the children are on board taking climate action. But it's those immoral few who say no, let them. And then, what annoys me is they're laughing at us. Every time we speak and every time there's this huge international meeting, and in the background they're laughing, oh, we're wasting their time. Because I recall when I I issued a call for a moratorium moratorium on the opening of new coal mines. And do you know what happened? One of the largest coal companies wrote to me and said, "You're wasting your time. Coal will always be the source of energy for the future." I was very angry. I went to write back, but my staff said, "No, don't bother." The fact that they are writing these, that bit water. But if you find the solution, if you can find the weapon to deal with it, guerrilla weapon, okay? We got to employ guerrilla tactics.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Alice Matthews from the ABC podcast Days Like These. Well, everyone just turned around. My question is for President Tom. I'd love to ask about Kiribati itself. I know there's current plans to turn it into a new Dubai and build new luxury resorts, and I'm really curious to know how you feel about those plans.
New resorts available in Kiribati.
Sorry, I have one bad ear. Sorry?
I have two barriers.
To build luxurious resorts in Kiribati and turn it into a new Dubai.
Oh, okay. We've been turning into Dubai and Singapore for the last how many years, okay? But I tell you, when you are confronted with a problem like that challenge, which doesn't appear to have a solution, okay? And I remember talking to the Japanese, and they were developing a floating island, and it looked very good, which would be able to accommodate something like 30 to 40,000 people. But I couldn't take it because it seemed so science fiction. But now maybe it is the realistic option, because then you don't have to keep raising the islands because it will keep floating up with the rising sea level. Because I'm sure you've been reading the reports. The sea level rise is rising. As I said yesterday, I see it rising. But it's going to accelerate with the melt of the Greenland Ocean, which has the potential to raise sea level by 7 meters. And of course, with the doomsday glass and now sliding off. So we are looking at something serious. We can build up the island, but I don't know if we can build it 20 to 25 meters, because I think this is something that we're looking at. So maybe a floating island is the answer. I don't know how Dubai did build those luxury islands, and they failed. The Chinese built those islands, and they are sinking. Okay, so we must learn from lessons that have already been taken. But I wouldn't risk the lives of my grandchildren on such a plan. There must be an absolutely 100% guaranteed plan.
Yes, thank you.
Maori from Goroganaka, thank you so much. I'd like to pose a couple of provocative, complex issues for the panel, if I could please. Because I think we're in fierce agreement on most issues in this room. So something like deep sea mining. I spoke to a politician a number of years ago. I expressed my distrust of deep sea mining, and they said to me, the amount of money that can come in to build hospitals, to build schools, etc., makes it not a black and white proposition for them. Similarly, before, you spoke of protecting islands, man-made ways, seawalls, etc. But if we do that, we're also elevating humans above the environment potentially and altering other ecosystems. So I wanted to kind of pose those provocative environmental challenges for the panel.
Yeah, again, the radical, huh? You know, I remember when I was Secretary for the Ministry of Natural Resources in the 1980s, and deep sea bed mining came on the agenda, and it was the rich, the richest of the deep ocean. We were so excited, we're going to be such a wealthy country. And of course, the mining did never happen for quite a long time, until now. It's almost ready, the trials have already started. I know people in the industry. And so the challenge has been for the Pacific Island countries is, do we go deep sea bed mining or don't we? And I can tell you the answer. It's going to split the region again, as it did on the fisheries issue. If I take you back to the fisheries issue, The establishment of the parties to the Nauru Agreement was exactly for that very reason, because we were divided, because there were Pacific Island countries whose fisheries was not so significant, they were not being fished, and there were those of us who depended almost entirely on fisheries license revenue. And so we said, no, we got to go alone on this one because everybody else is dragging their feet because it doesn't matter for them. And so that's why the parties to the Nauru Agreement was established. Okay? When everything else, when we had the problem with the Americans fishing our waters because they didn't recognize the national jurisdiction on the highly microgyne species. You know, I don't know if you remember those incidents. When we sent a skiff with rifles, 303 rifles, and a couple of policemen to arrest a persona. And they did, they came back with the persona. But there was so much confrontation. Papua New Guinea arrested the Dedeka. What happened? They got penalized by the Americans. And so we had to resolve the issue because the Americans would only accept the regional management. But there was none, because licensing was an individual basis. So we went to the American Tuna Boat Association to start an agreement, and we did. But it was badly against us, but we had no choice. But the ATA, the American Tuna Boat Association agreement, is now the basis upon which the U.S. multilateral treaty is founded, including the 85% to be distributed amongst the resource owners, and the 15% for all of the Pacific Island countries, even those whose waters are not being fished. Okay, so deep sea bed mining has the potential to do that again, because I guarantee you, Cook Islands is not going to stop mining. No, we'll go ahead mining. Maybe Clippers will go ahead mining. And the reason is because they need it. And so the excuses are this: we don't know the environmental impacts, so don't go. But we know the environmental impacts of fossil fuels, but they're still going. Why don't we attack those and allow these countries the opportunity to generate the resources so that they can buy those floating islands? They cost $2 billion. Maybe you can buy more than 2. But seriously, you know, if the world is going to be damaged, why should we save the oceans? Seriously, I'm asking these questions, okay? Because I must admit, these are the things that go through my mind. You know, if our world is going to be destroyed, why should we save the oceans for you? Okay? I think it's a fair question. And so, but quite frankly, the deep sea bed mining is going to split the region once again.
Well, I think President Tom had earlier said that there is no agreement on some issues even within the PEV. So, well, thank you for the question. There was, I think, one final one, or the two, okay. We'll just take the last two. I think we're running out of time. Thank you.
I hope you can hear me.
Louder.
I'll try. My question was about climate change refugees. And historically, Australia hasn't committed enough to climate action, and maybe recognising climate change refugee status would kind of be an admission that they're not doing enough and force their hand to do more. But now that we have, the Albanese government is in office now, and they've made a greater commitment to climate action. So I wondered if you think there might be recognition of climate change refugees coming with the new government, and if you think that they'll be subject to the same extended processing times as refugees of other status.
I seriously doubt the Australian government will go to that level, because it is an admission of fault, I think, to them, and they'll try and reframe it in some sort of, worker migration program.
Okay.
As another way of dealing with it, rather than sort of recognising and giving proper refugee status to people displaced by climate change. So I think it's more likely to be some sort of, a more open, migration scheme.
Yeah. Yes. Kavita.
Thank you. Hello again. My question is, how does debt play a role in Pacific regionalism and overcoming the climate crisis? Because it is such a fundamental ask in climate justice, which is debt justice. I'm aware that Fiji is under several generations of debt. At the same, I'm not sure about the other islands. At the same time, we are also heavily dependent on aid and on funding. And here we are asking for loss and damage finances, reparations, more funding on adaptation and so forth. So I really want to understand money and how it plays a role.
Well, thank you. I'm not a finance expert, but I certainly know that there are some countries in Africa and other parts of regions of the world who are crippled by debt. And, you know, if it was possible to say, let's wipe that debt, you know, as an action on climate change, you know, as a way of dealing with that. And I think, you know, that could be done in some of the countries. Not all the Pacific Island countries are you know, heavily in debt, but it's one option that's out there. And certainly, you know, it's one option to be explored.
All right, let's do the final one. Corinne?
Thank you. Thanks very much to the panel for your thoughts and your time and your wisdom. My name is Karina from the Edmund Rice Centre. This question follows on from the last question about climate refugees. It's for Ian. We've been doing a lot of thinking at the Edmund Rice Centre about what we can do to help advocate for the climate displacement in the region, which we know is likely to come. Have you got any words of wisdom for NGOs who wish to advocate on this issue to the Australian government? It's such a sensitive issue. It's very hard to understand how to position ourselves. Thank you.
Yep.
Well, you know, this may come from outside the region, you know, to get some more enlightened countries to sort of, you know, start talking about this. And we certainly can see from some Latin American countries, they're opening up that definition of refugees to deal with that. And there are other regions who are doing that. And I think, you know, as that progresses, then, you know, we can draw that attention to this region. What I hope, and there's certainly a PhD student here at ANU looking at the whole issue of an inter-Pacific human rights organisation. I recently attended the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and, you know, it's a very powerful organisation that has allowed civil society or people, you know, to present and have hearings where governments are asked to respond to those issues. And I think, you know, if there was, you know, some sort of human rights body in the region, I think that would help that sort of dialogue.
All right, thank you. Just two things I overlooked. Firstly, when I acknowledged Edmund Rice Centre, I should have acknowledged Alope, the new head of the Edmund Rice Centre, who I've noticed is in the room. Secondly, appreciate Katerina and the ANU team for inviting PEV to host this session. I think it was very generous of them, and they you know, have given us space and so on. And with that, I think rather than me doing the thanking, may I hand over to Katerina to say a final few words and out of the session. Thank you.
I've been feeling quite tired most of today, and this particular session, I've surprised myself by being so attentive and so focused and so enlightened by everything you all had to say. It's just been amazing, the sheer breadth, but also diversity of the different views you bring. And I know you know, when you made a comment about gender balance earlier, and a few of us were kind of looking at each other and going, oh, there's no women. But, and thank you so much for, you know, mentioning that. But what you all brought that was wonderful and profound and so interesting, and I think many of us in academia, many of us in Pacific Studies don't often get to hear the range of diversity from our leaders and kind of understand how they operate in these spaces with different kinds of baskets of skill sets and ideas and knowledge and concerns. So I was quite struck by the ways in which Anote, for example, really kind of embodied that kind of champion, knocking at the doors, demanding to be heard, being the only person in the room, coming from a small island and going, I'm not going away, I'm still here, still alive, still alive. Like, that was such a amazing thing to kind of think through, because sometimes when you're constantly covered in the media, you become, like when you hear it on repeat, you're like, oh yeah, that's Kiribati, they've been traveling around the world. But to hear it from you was actually quite inspiring, like really, really inspiring, because that's quite hard, really, really difficult work. And to continue to have that energy now is a gift. Like, I think it's a real gift for all of us. So I was really, really struck by that. And then listening to Kaliopate Tahola, whose family I've known for many years. I know your very talented children, and and I know my parents were good friends with you. I was really struck by the very methodical way in which you broke down all of these aspects of regionalism. And some of us who are not in political science or international relations, or don't constantly follow the more technical aspects of regionalism, again, we don't often think or reflect on the ways in which our leaders are also kind of really methodically working through and thinking about all of these different aspects. So to talk about the political, to talk about the economic, to talk about the security, it really struck me why you were such an effective diplomat and also civil servant who really thought through in a careful way all of these different things so you could be of service in all of these areas, and why you were so respected for that in Fiji and the region. So again, that was beautiful to witness and reflect on. And then I was saying to Natalie, who was sitting next to me, because Natalie is not as familiar with the Pacific Islands Forum, and we were kind of breaking everything down, and was Googling the forum and then showing it to her, and it's like, that's the forum. As everyone was talking, and I was explaining who Ian Fry was, and explaining your background in advocating for Tuvalu and operating on a global stage, and the very humble way in which you've been doing that hard work for a very long time, which is why you were selected to be in this UN Special Rapporteur role. I was giving Natalie the whole breakdown about the way in which you've been conducting yourself in these international spaces, and why you've been such an effective voice for Tuvalu and for the region as well. And we were all kind of like nodding and following along. So there was like a back discourse going on simultaneously as each of you were speaking. And the point of it all was that we were truly appreciating and being inspired by each one of your journeys. So I hope you understand that for all of us tonight, it's been quite a gift, and also the ways in which Mahendra framed the work of the Pacific Elders' Voice, doing this work in retirement when they should be chilling out, when they should be just relaxing, enjoying their grandchildren, or doing something else that's not so stressful, that doesn't require getting on a plane or coming onto another Zoom. That is love for the region. That is love and care for the region. So one of the reasons myself and Rebecca Monson and Tali Mangione and Lisa Hilly and the whole organizing committee was committed to making sure we brought the Pacific Elders into this space is that we deeply appreciate the fact that you're doing these things and you don't have to. You really don't. And we talk about retirees in Australia all the time. Okay, those of you from Australia, they're talking about how much money they have in the bank and what they're going to do with it and how many houses they might be able to buy, etc., etc. It's actually a political issue that can make or break political parties, the conditions of usually wealthy retirees. And here we have Pacific people, Pacific elders committed to the region in a long-term way, who still love and care for this region. May we all be like you.
Thank you.